Hey guys, welcome to another video, and today I'll be covering over my Xenon's class guide. It's gonna be the updated Xenon guide. I did make one on Smartboard, but I am currently making an updated one just because there's a few new things that happen, including more fifth job skills and what have you. There's gonna be a table of contents that are posted on the screen right now if you want to skip anything. The guide is gonna be relatively long, but it should be pretty in-depth, and I want to cover as much as I can about the class and whether or not you should play it and if it fits your playstyle. We'll be going over skills first, and then after that we'll be covering over fifth job skills, the V matrix, and then we'll go over the hyperstats, the link skills, the equipment, whatever you want to go for on that equipment, so on and so forth, and should be good to go. Alright, so let's start off first with the first job skills. Not first job, start with the beginner. So Hero Zeka you get when you reach 4th job on Xenon, and then it just gets placed in your Xenon basic skill. Blessing of the Fairy you already have on every character. The way Blessing of the Fairy works is that essentially it's the strongest character in your server, and it maxes out at level 20. Soaring skill is a different thing. Empress's Blessing is the same thing as Blessing of the Fairy, except it's for Cygnus Knights. Will of the Alliance you can pick up by going to the Arev Conference Pavilion. Now this is the first actual real Xenon skill, it's Supply Surplus. Now if you see over here, let me quickly get rid of that. This little thing right here, the way the supply circuit works is that Xenon gets 1 all-stat or 1% all-stat per power unit. This counts as sort of like a secondary mana bar, and you need this to use certain skills, and I'll explain that a little bit later. We have Multilateral 1. As you guys know, Xenons have 3 main stats, whereas opposed to some other classes which only have 1 main stat of Strength, Dex, Int, or Luck. Xenons use 3. They use Strength, Dex, and Luck, so you want to make sure that you have a good balance of stats in those respective slots. Multilateral is a recurring skill that you see throughout your Xenon's adventure, and it gives you bonus stats depending on how far you are in progression of your AP, which is the points right here. It gives you knockback resistance, which is also known as stance. It gives you elemental resistance and abnormal stats resistance, which is, there's right here. And then elemental resistance basically makes it so that you take less damage from elemental attacks. Not the most effective, but it's there. And at 20 luck, you get 3% avoidability, which is your dodge rate. And then if you have all 3, you get 3% bonus damage. You have Promessa Escape, which takes you all the way over to Veritas, which is the job advancement location for Xenon. There you go. This little place right here. That's also where you can pick up your core, which is this right here, or your heart and your core if I remember correctly. Don't remember exactly who it is, but one of these NPCs to give you a heart, which is where you get your emblem, or your power source for that matter. Modal Shift, which I'll explain a little bit later. This is a very useful skill that allows you to switch between multiple attacking skills. Liberty Boosters activate internal thrusters that allow you to hover for a period of time. Let me show you right now. And you can just float wherever you want to. This can also be activated anywhere. Most of these flying mounts or flying abilities can be used only in towns, but Liberty Boosters I believe you can use anywhere. Mimic Protocol, this is cool. So Mimic Protocol basically ignores all stat requirements for equipment. So if there's an equipment that has a certain amount of base stat that you need, like here, the Eagle Eye Assassin Shirt requires 450 luck. Mimic Protocol gets rid of that requirement, and it also lets you equip both Pirate and Thief equipment. So here I have Eagle Eye Assassin Shirt and pants, which are Thief, and then I have a Pirate Whipblade here, I have a Pirate Belt, and I also have Pirate Gloves. So you can equip a multitude of equipment, or different types of equipment depending on the class, for both Pirate and Thief. However, I'll explain a little bit more later in terms of equipment, why you should be careful about it. So let's go into first job. The first job skill you get is Beam Spline, which is not too bad. It's like a pretty standard mobbing attack. It's got decent range and it covers a lot of damage. The way Beam Spline works is that essentially it attacks once and then attacks the second time. The first attack is a little shorter, the second attack is a little bit more range, but it's a pretty basic and elementary attacking skill. It shouldn't be too difficult to use. Pretty reliable. Propulsion Burst, which is a flash jump. Like most thieves and pirates, Xenon can use Propulsion Burst twice, and it takes you a pretty considerable distance. The only drawback to this skill is that it kind of locks you in place. You'll notice that the second you jump, you're kind of frozen for a bit in the air. It can get a little inconvenient, but it lets you act out pretty quickly. The Propulsion Burst flash jump for Xenon does have a little bit of ending lag. It's still really good. Circuit Surge. It's your first ability that actually makes use of your supply surplus ability right here, which gives you, extra points. Now the way this skill works is that it consumes energy to give you 30 weapon attack. Now remember that supply surplus takes 1% all stat per extra power unit that you have over here. And you might be thinking do I want to take that out so that I can get 30 attack? Is it worth it? It is, but trust me, there is a way to work around it. This is what it looks like. Pretty good animation, and it gives a decent amount of attack. Radial Nerve is a passive skill that gives you max speed or it gives you speed and jump. It's pretty useful. We have Pinpoint Salvo. Now you can turn this on, and the way it works is that every time you deal damage to a mob, extra missiles will fly out and deal bonus damage. Let me show you right now. Okay, so I'm going to attack this guy right here. And then missiles come out and they start attacking nearby monsters. It's really good for stationary mobbing, and it's good for like if you have a lot of mobbing to do for training and whatever. And if your missiles are strong enough and can one-shot targets, it actually makes Xenon pretty strong when it comes to mobbing. Multilateral 2, it's an upgrade, so when you're at 40 strength, dex, and luck, you get bonuses to the stance, your resistances, your avoidability, and then more damage, HP, and MP. Right here. So Xenons have a lot of damage bonuses, as you can tell right here, total damage, because of multilateral, because you have 3% right over here. Where is it? 3% right over here, then you have 5% over here, and there's going to be some more even further. In terms of maxing your abilities, you want to make sure you max out your Propulsion Burst first, and then your Radial Nerve. All your passive skills should be maxed first before you go into your active, and Beam Spline should be the last one that you want to go for. Quicksilver. Now Quicksilver is actually the first modal shift ability that you get in second job, and you get up to 4 different modal shifts. The way it works is that this is actually 3 attacking skills. We have Takeoff, and then if I were to activate modal shift, let me actually first get rid of all the stuff in front. There you go. You have 3 different choices to choose from, and to actually select them, you just have to select the arrow keys. So, oops, there's a lot, yeah. So let's start off first with Quicksilver Flash. It's a pretty quick attacking skill. Let me show you how it looks. It just attacks all mobs in front of you, and it attacks them 3 times. Pretty good. Not too bad. It's the main DPS attacking skill for second job. The second Quicksilver is, I believe it's called Concentrate, which it shoots out I guess like a penetrating whip that deals, it has bonus critical hit rate, and it has a much longer reach. Let me show you. So it's good for, it has much longer range, and this is the more ideal mobbing skill because it has much more reach. And also has bonus critical hit rate. Definitely the more reliable, or the more important of the Quicksilver skills, because it also has the most damage. The third one is Quicksilver Takeoff, which is a vertical jump skill, and it's not really meant for damage, but it has good mobbing, or it does have decent mobbing potential, but it's mostly just meant to use as a vertical jump. Very useful. And that's what a lot of people like to use for their Quicksilver skill once they get the other jobs. Ion Thrust, it puts you on like an Ion Thruster, which is a temporary mount, and while you hold the skill down, you can move around really quickly, and it pushes nearby mobs. It does drain a bit of your supply energy, I believe, every time you cast it, about 2 per usage, but it lasts, I think, 8 or 9 seconds. I'm not entirely sure. This is what it looks like. You actually move pretty fast on it too. It gives you 220% max movement speed, which is, I think, the most any mount can ever give you. Not the most reliable skill though, just because if you want to go around for transport, you would flash jump, or if you want to just like attack, then you would just use Quicksilver. Efficiency Streamline is another buff. It gives you 30% HP and MP for 240 seconds. Think of it like a hyper body. It's basically a hyper body for Xenon. Xenon Booster is a booster skill. I'm sure you guys have seen this. They have at least one for every class. That's what it looks like. Now these do not use any surplus. You can tell if a skill uses surplus energy if there's like a blue border around it with like kind of like a banner, as you see right here. The same thing with Ion Thrust, it costs energy. We have Structural Integrity, which gives you 20 all stat. Then we have Xenon Mastery, which gives you 20 attack and mastery. In case you guys don't know what mastery is, mastery basically means the consistency in your damage. So you have a lower damage bracket and you have an upper damage bracket. The way mastery works is that it increases the lower damage bracket to get as close as possible to the upper damage bracket, so there's less fluctuation between damage. Multilateral 3, it gives you 7% of everything, which puts you at a total of, I believe, 15% total damage so far. Pinpoint Radio Salvo Design, or Pinpoint Salvo Design, or Pinpoint Salvo Redesign, excuse me, it just increases the damage of your Pinpoint Salvo. Then finally, Perspective Shift, which permanently gives you 40% critical hit rate, which is awesome. Critical hit rate never hurts anyone, it's a very valuable skill. Like I said before, you want to max out all of your passives first. Of course, put 1 point in Quicksilver, 1 point in Ion Thrust, and then start maxing out your Mastery first, then your Booster, and then your Perspective Shift, and get all your passives out of the way before you go into finishing these off. Fortunately, Xenon does max all of his skills, so you have no worry as to like which one you don't want to max out. They will all max out, but Ion Thrust should be the last one you max. Third job, Combat Switch Air Whip, which is the next modal shift skill. There are 3, which I will show you right now. So the first one is Explosion, and it basically shoots your whip blade in sort of like a chain-like fashion, and it explodes everything around it. Let me show you right here. That's what it looks like. Relatively good skill. It's a little slow, but it does do a decent amount of damage, and it's got good range. The next one is Air Whip, which is the most common use for combat switch after 4th job. It basically is another mopping skill that does bonus damage to mobs that have upper or that are in airborne, which does another 190% for a total of 460. This is what it looks like. It has a lot of good horizontal and it also has some decent vertical range, so it's really good to use. Let me show you right here. There you go. Oops, sorry about that. And then the last one is Combat Switch Fission, which can only be used while you're in the air, and it attacks all mobs directly under you. So let me show you how it looks like. It does propel you a tiny bit up in the air, so you can use it as a vertical skill. So you want to use it like this. Unfortunately, it can be chained with Quicksilver Takeoff. It's just not the most reliable. However, you can use it to get yourself a little higher up. Let me see if I can get it. There you go. Not the most useful skill. It's kind of boring actually, and it's very impractical. A lot of people just like to stick with Combat Switch Air Whip. Diagonal Chase. It's a diagonal dash skill that can be used up to twice, one if you're in the ground and one if you're in the air. It has very extensive range and it can be used to travel very long distances at a very fast speed. You can only use one diagonal chase while you're in the air, but if you use diagonal chase while you're in the ground, or while you're on the ground, you can use another one while you're in the air just because it counts as your first diagonal chase counts as you being on the ground. It's got very good range. A lot of people, what they like to do, or at least what I like to do, is I like to use takeoff with a diagonal chase to get a lot of vertical range. Like this. There you go. Gravity Pillar? I lied. Okay, so Xenon does not actually max all of his skills. This is the first one. This is the only one that you don't want to max. It's a vertical attack skill, or it's a, I guess you can say it's a launching skill. It basically shoots up mobs in the air, and you're supposed to synergize that with a Combat Switch Air Whip, but it's not the most reliable skill. I never use this anymore anyway. Hybrid Defenses, it's another supply surplus skill. It consumes 7 energy to give you basically 100% avoidability for 10 attacks. You see there's a count right here and it goes down by 1 each time. It's pretty good against bosses that have touch damage like in Mulang Dojo, but other than that, not so much. Although it does give you 10 all stat and 400 defense, so it makes you decently tanky. Aegis System is the second missile ability that you have. Now this one, the difference with this one is that Aegis System activates every time you evade, every time you take damage or every time you evade an attack. So the cool thing about Aegis System is that it actually procs Pinpoint Salvo. So if you dodge an attack and you open Aegis System, Pinpoint Salvo missiles will follow shortly after, like this. The first one is the Aegis System, and the second one is Pinpoint Salvo. It does have a slight cooldown, same with Pinpoint Salvo, but you know, that's perfectly fine. Triangulation. This skill I actually never noticed anymore these days, but the way it works is that every time you attack, you have a chance to attach a stack on a target, and when you reach 3 stacks, they deal damage to the target and reduce their accuracy and avoidability right after. It does a decent amount of damage, but you just never see it too often, and it doesn't really it doesn't really amount to much, but it's still a decent skill to have. Manifest Projector, Xenons have a Shadow Partner, which is awesome. This is also the best Shadow Partner in the game. The reason why I say that, this Shadow Partner doesn't have an actual buff duration. It lasts forever. There's no duration on it. The only thing that causes it to go away is if you take 1000% of your max HP, meaning since I have 60,000, if I take 600,000 total damage, it disappears, but I can just make another one right after. And it also looks cool because it has a blue silhouette, almost like a kind of like a turquoise or teal silhouette on it, which I actually like a lot. Multilateral 4, 10% everything, which puts you up to 25% total damage. Emergency Resupply, this is a really good skill. The way it works is that if you're ever low on surplus, you can just press Emergency Resupply to give you 10 units instantly. It costs nothing except mana, and it does have a short cooldown, but it's still a very reliable skill. Pinpoint Salvo Redesign B, it's another passive skill that increases Xenon's Pinpoint Salvo by 30% more damage, and stacks with the first enhancement, and it also adds towards the first job. 4th job, now this is where the class gets really fun. Beam Dance, this is my favorite skill of all time. It's a hurricane mobbing ability that attacks both sides, and it also causes you, or it also lets you jump up and down if you want to use it like that. This is what it looks like. The animation looks amazing. It looks super cool. I love it a lot. You can jump. You can also jump down. It's a little slow, but it's still a really powerful skill and has really good range on both sides. We have Mecha Purge, which is the second to last modal shift. You get actually 2 modal shift skills in 4th job. Mecha Purge is 3 skills. The main one is Snipe. Actually, do I have a dummy real quick? No, I do not. Okay, the way that Mecha Purge Snipe works is it's a single targeting skill that does bonus damage because it ignores a portion of the enemy's defense, which I'll show you right here. It's a very powerful skill, and it's meant to be your main DPS skill for single targets. Of course, if you're targeting multiple units, then you want to go with Beam Dance. The second one is Mecha Purge Bombard, which is a more of a mobbing skill. It has basically the same range as Snipe, only it attacks multiple targets, and it summons a giant tank that blasts the entire area in front of you. I still think in terms of mobbing, it's better if you use Beam Dance because it covers both sides, but if you want to use Bombard, it's also a viable option. Then the last one is probably the most useless modal shift skill, not counting Fission, is Bombardment, which is kind of like it's similar to, it has basically the same range as Beam Dance, but it attacks behind you and it attacks in front of you like that. It does a decent amount of damage, but I never really see myself using it. I mostly just stick to Snipe, and for any mobbing I use Beam Dance or Air Whip. Air Whip is slightly faster than Bombard, and it has basically the same range. Maybe like slightly less, but Air Whip is usually a lot faster for mobbing. Also keep in mind you guys can attach the modal shift hotkey anywhere you want to, so if you want to switch quickly without actually having to open the skill tab and click the button, you can just do it right here. Modal shift, if you use just the modal shift skill, it cycles through the various modal shift abilities that you have. So that's what you can use. You gotta kind of get the hang of it when it comes to like choosing which skill, but the order is it first does Mecha Purge, then Hypergram Field, then Combat Switch, and then Quicksilver Takeoff. However, if you use an ability directly after, or if you use Modal Shift directly after using a Modal Shift ability, it will already proc in that sense. So let me show you how it looks. By default, it's Mecha Purge, Hypergram Field, Combat Switch, and then Quicksilver. But if you use any ability other than Mecha Purge beforehand, it will automatically switch to that specific mode. So since I just used Quicksilver, it starts off at Quicksilver. Since I used Air Whip, it starts off, or since I use Combat Switch, it switches to Combat Switch. And if I were to use Hypergram Field, it automatically switches to Hypergram Field. Which takes us to our next skill, Hypergram Field. There are 3 fields for this skill, and it's basically the same exact principle. It summons kind of like a force field that has various effects. The first one is Hypergram Field Penetrate, which creates a green field, and the way it works is that every time the ball touches a target, it does damage. The purple one is Hypergram Field Penetrate, or no, this is Penetrate. Force Field is this one, which creates a purple field, and essentially this one, the difference between this one and the green one is that this one damages all enemies just simply in the purple zone, which is commonly the ideal Hypergram Field. The reason why you want to use this one instead of the green one is because, like I said, the purple one attacks all enemies that are inside, and it also does way more damage. It used to be actually the green one that you wanted to use back when there was a damage cap, however now there isn't, because the green field does have a little bit more attack speed. The third one, which is, actually this is the most useless modal shift, it's Hypergram Field Support. The basic gist of it is that you get basically 10% more HP if you're in the field. So I'm going to put that in there, and then I'm going to walk into it. It increases your max HP by 10%, and it also gives you 1 recharge for your power unit. It's completely useless, you don't want to use it. Unfortunately, it's red, and I like the red color. I wish the red color could go into the purple one, but you know it's perfectly fine. Op-Art's Code. This is one of the most powerful buff skills in the entire game. It lasts a very short duration, however for 30 seconds you get 25% final damage and 30% boss damage. It costs all 20 of your energy surplus, however a lot of people what they like to do is use Op-Art's Code, and then they use Power Resupply or Emergency Resupply right after to give you at least half of your all stats back. Or what a lot of other people tend to do is they like to use Amarant Generator. I'll explain that a little bit later. It's a very powerful skill though, look how much range it gives. Instant Shock, it increases your evasion chance and it also gives you more damage for your HS system, which is this skill right here. So with that combined, so if we were to have, okay, Multilateral 1, 3% avoidability, Multilateral 2, which is 5%, bring it up to 8. Then we have 7% more here, which is 15. Then we have 10 more here, which is 25. And then we put in Instant Shock, which brings it up to 65%. And then there are 2 more multilateral skills which I'll get to in a bit, but that basically puts you up to about 75% avoidability. No, not 75%, 80%. Xenon Expert is the upgraded mastery for Xenons, and it gives you 70% mastery, 30 attack power, and 8% critical damage, which is actually pretty good. Critical damage is a very important stat. Temporal Pod, the way this works is while you're in it, let me see, I actually don't use the skill at all, but essentially it reduces the skill cooldowns of your party members I don't really know what it's for though, because I don't think it works at all. I mean, I guess it looks cool, but I don't really use this at all. Maple Warrior, you know, everyone has that. Heroes Will, everyone has that. Actually, Maple Warrior is really good because it increases all stats, and since Xenon uses 3 stats, Maple Warrior actually provides the most benefit to Xenons more than any other class. Offensive Matrix gives you 50% stance, which combined with your multilateral will put you at 90%, and it also gives you 30% PDR, or ignore defense. Multilateral 5 is the 4-chop skill version of multilateral, and it gives you 10% of everything. Pinpoint Salvo, perfect design, it's another upgrade for your Pinpoint Salvo. Multilateral 6 is when you reach level 200 and it gives you 5% more. So all in all it gives you, let's see, okay, so 25%, then 35% and 40% total damage, which is really good. It gives you 40% avoidability and it gives you 40% knockback resistance, which combined with this, it gives you 90%. And this is a passive skill, by the way, you just only need to apply your AP properly. I'll explain a little bit more about that later. Now let's go into hyper skills first. You have Beam Dance, Mecha Purge, and then Hypergram Field. The recommended point distribution for this is you want Beam Dance Reinforce, Beam Dance Spread for more mobbing, Mecha Purge Reinforce for more damage, Mecha Purge Guard Break for more ignore defense, and then Hypergram Field Persist. Persist basically increases the duration of Hypergram Field, and since it has a cooldown of 30 seconds, but it lasts 30 seconds, then it's like you get to have it up permanently. You have 3 abilities. You have Amaranth Generator, which, as I said before, it forces your supply circuit to maximum, and it also causes all of your supply abilities to cost 0 supply. Let me show you right now. Looks like this, and I can basically spam Opwards code forever while the duration lasts, and it never drains any surplus. It's pretty reliable, especially if you want to use like a lot of abilities that cost surplus, like you know, hybrid defenses and Opwards code and like Ion Thrust. Well, no one uses Ion Thrust, but you know, Circuit Surge. Actually, if memory serves, Perspective Shift used to be a buff and it used to cost Supply Circuit, but not anymore. Entangling Lash is your 170 skill and it serves as a bind. It's a 10-second bind, it hits 15 enemies, it has a 3-minute cooldown, and you can also increase the bind duration of Entangling Lash depending on how much damage you actually do with it. I don't remember exactly what the protocol is for that or what the formula is for that, but this is what it looks like. Unfortunately, I'm going to be one-shotting these mobs just because they're way too strong, but if I didn't, they would be binded. Let me show you right here. It's a pretty good skill, very useful. And Orbital Cataclysm is our level 200 skill. It is an ultimate ability that has a 50-second cooldown, pretty short. And what it does is it does 900% damage to all targets. It decreases the defense by 30%, so it's a debuff. And it also increases your damage by 10%. So it's a very powerful ability. This is what it looks like. The ability is a little slow, but fortunately you're invincible during the cast of the duration, so you don't end up dying. Now on to Fit Job. Okay, so Xenon's attacking skill is Omega Blaster, right here, which the way it works is that you hold down the skill for as long as you want to. The more you hold down the skill, the longer this skill lasts, and you get to do whatever the hell you want while you're attacking. You can attack, you can buff, you can climb up ladders. As long as you're holding the skill down, you should be okay. However, if you do get killed or if you do get stunned, you do lose the duration, I believe. Oh no, actually, if you get stunned, it wouldn't matter anyway. However, I believe if you are seduced to where you can't control your character, then it will disable the Omega Blaster. But depending on how long it charges up, which you can see by the meter over here, it shoots a giant laser in front of you like this. And the entire time you can't move. However, you are invincible during the entire time and it just continues attacking all enemies in front of you. It's really good for bosses that like to move around a lot because it covers a large range and does a decent amount of damage. I believe the longest it can last is 11 seconds, not too bad. I believe it could last longer. I remember it lasting a lot longer than 11 seconds, but that might just be my imagination. Our other skill is Core Overload. Now the way it works is that it actually doubles your supply surplus gauge at the expense of costing increased mana every second. Let me show you right now. The way this skill works is that it says when the skill's cast, it costs 1% max MP plus 191 per second. It allows you to charge 20 additional surplus energy and the charge time is halved. Final damage increases by 1% per surplus energy charged. What they mean by that is like for the all the bonus surplus that you have, which goes up to 40. And you can use the skill again to deactivate it early. Extra surplus energy disappears immediately on skill deactivation. It also has its own active effect, which sometimes shocks areas around you for a lot of damage. Now, this skill costs more and more MP the longer you use it, which means, like, let me show you right now. This is the way it works. That's pretty cool. It turns your surplus gauge red, and during this time, your skills cost no surplus, just like Amaranth Generator. However, you start to drain mana very quickly, and you cannot recover mana by any means. Familiar, Restorative Potion, nothing. So this is what it looks like. It increases your skill, and you notice every so often it releases kind of like a Shockwave Force Shield. Let me show you how it looks. There you go. It's pretty cool. It's an extra DPS skill. It continues to increase your gauge, and it also increases your final damage, as well as the amount of all stat that you received right here. There you go. However, depending on how much max mana you have, that's basically the buff duration of it. People have tried to MP wash the Xenon. Nexon did patch it, which kind of sucks, but basically the more mana you have, the longer this lasts. But if you had about like maybe 30,000, 35,000 mana, then you should be able to enjoy 40 surplus energy for at least like a good 20 seconds or so. This skill does last a long time. However, just remember, any skills you use will also cost mana themselves, so be careful about that. You just press the skill again to deactivate it and you'll go back to normal. It's a good way to use Core Overload is to chain this with Omega Blaster. That's usually how it works. You want to Entangling Lash them, then Orbital Cataclysm, then Omega Blaster after using Core Overload. It's pretty good. Since Xenons are both Pirate and Thief, they also have access to Pirate and Thief exclusive job skills like Last Resort and Loaded Dice. There's also Overdrive, and you also get the Resistance skill, which is Resistance Infantry. Not too bad. They have a very colorful cast of attacks. In terms of what you want to max out for the boost nodes, your perfect trio is Beam Dance, Mecha Purge, and Hypergram Field. You could also invest in Pinpoint Salvo if you want to for more damage, and you can, if you want to increase your Combat Switch, you can as well. The main reason is because, like I said, Combat Switch Air Whip is your main mobbing skill because it's the fastest and it covers a decent amount of range. You want to use it like that. Beam Dance can also be a good mobbing skill, but it's really slow because like you move very slowly. But with Air Whip, you can just like flash up and you can use Air Whip that way. Apart from that, you know, your decent skills, that's also fine. I don't actually recommend using Overdrive because it lowers your attack after using it, which is pretty pointless. Combat Orders, Advanced Blessing, what have you, that's also fine. Urdanova, you can use it, however, Xenons already have Entangling Lash, so that's not a problem. And I mostly use Resistance Infantry if I'm trying to go for heavy DPS or if I'm trying to do some training. As for hyperstats, what you want to put in, as per usual, you want to go for boss damage, ignore defense, critical damage, and critical hit rate. Because, you know, the more critical hit rate you have on your Xenons, the better. Oh, I should also mention this. The bonuses that you get from Beam Dance are more targets and more PDR. For Mecha Purge, it gives you 5% crit rate, which is good, and 20% ignore defense. And Hypergram Field gives you more crit rate and ignore defense as well. As for what you want to do with your stat distribution, you want to go for 330. At least the way you want to go is that until you reach level 200, you want to at least put 330 points into Strength, Dex, and Luck. And then from then on, I think it depends on a person's playstyle. People ask me like, what should I invest in afterwards? I like to do mostly luck because I tend to be a luck-based class. However, if you want to also invest points into strength and dex, that's perfectly fine. It depends on what you have most. So if you have like a lot of dex-based items, like I actually have quite a few, then you can go for dex. If you want to go for strength, you can go for that as well. But just make sure you have a good balance. Or if you want to, you can go for just a nice balance of all three, which is what I might do. In terms of actual equipment, my recommendation is to aim for as much boss damage as possible. Xenons are really good when it comes to bossing, and well, you don't want to go for too much boss damage, but the more boss damage you have, the better. Percent attack is also very worthwhile, and for your non-weapons, you want to go for as much all stat as you can. Fortunately, there's not a problem if you do get, like, let's say you see right here 12% strength, that's perfectly fine. Since Xenons benefit from 3 different stats, you can make use of all 3 of them. But for the most part, you want to go for all stat like this. This is a perfect item for Xenon. As for flames, you want to once again go for all stat, strength, dex, and luck, however much you can get of each. If you can get a lot of it, like let's say 48, 84, and 44, that's perfectly fine. Percent all stat, I'm not entirely sure if percent all stat is worth it. I still think flat stat is a little bit better, but for Xenon, that might be a different case. And scrolling. For scrolling, Prime Scrolls. Prime Scrolls, you can never go wrong with Prime Scrolls. Xenons are super good when it comes to Prime Scrolls. For Golics, you obviously just want to use regular Golic Scrolls, but for like Seawater items, for CRA, for your Outlaw Heart, for your Tyrant's Priming, best option for you to go. And then my recommend totems are actually the Shanghai Yu Garden totems because they do give a hefty amount of all stat, and they're pretty accessible. As for Link skills, I don't actually have many on him right now just because my Dual Blade has my main ones, but my recommended Link skills are Pirate Blessing, Fury Unleashed, Phantom Instinct, Keen Edge, Elementalism, Light Wash, Wild Rage, Unfair Advantage, that's contingent, Spirit of Freedom if you plan to boss, the obvious training Link skills like, you know, Evan, Aaron, and Mercedes, Solace, which is really good too. Then terms and conditions for extra burst for your Omega Blaster, and focus spirit. You already have hybrid logic, which gives you 10% all stat. It's also one of the most useful link skills out there, so Xenon's definitely a worthwhile class to train up if you don't plan to main one. All in all, Xenons have a ton of bonus total damage, as well as they have a decent amount of final damage if you have both Op Arts Code and Core Overload. They also do have a lot of high boss damage, so definitely keep a good eye on that. And they do have a lot of passive ignore defense due to the fact that a lot of their abilities have ignore defense, like Mecha Purge, which gives you 30% here, then 10% here, and then 20% here, as well as ignore defense in terms of offensive matrix, which give you 30% right there as well. Xenons have extremely high base stats, and therefore you should take advantage of the fact that they tend to be very strong in the early game. The mid game, they're also pretty tough too. However, towards the late game, unless you have a lot of all stat in your items, Xenons fall off a lot just purely because they only receive 33% benefit from each stat. In other words, if you want to get the most benefit from Xenon's skills and stats, is that you want to actually go for all stat, and all stat is very hard to get. If you're playing on, let's say, like a thief, you can benefit from both luck and all stat, but for Xenon, if you want the most benefit, you just got to go for only all stat, which kind of sucks. But apart from that, I really love their class. They're a really fun class. I enjoyed them quite a bit, and I think they're definitely pretty cool because there's a lot of different skills that you can go for. You basically have, let's say, 3, especially with the modal shift, you have 3 different skills. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. You guys get the idea. There's a ton of different skills that you can use for Xenon. Keeps the class interesting. It's fun. Their skills are really flashy, and overall, I definitely recommend it. I would give Xenon a solid 9 out of 10 rating. They are actually really high in the meta list once they get their new Fit Job skill, which is going to be a humongous hypergram field. A lot of people don't like it too much just because they think it's pretty boring, but think about how good that is for mobbing, especially because that thing covers up literally the entire screen. And I think I covered pretty much everything there is to cover. If I missed out on anything, please let me know in the comment section below. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching, and once again, questions are welcome, and I'll be sure to answer them to the best of my ability. Ultimately, in the end though, if the playstyle is not good enough for you, then of course you don't want to main this class, you want to play what's fun. But I think that should be all. The next class guide that's going to be coming out is going to be Dual Blade, and I hope you guys are looking forward to that. But for now, I will see you in the next one. Take care.